Welcome back. Generation Green is a youth-led intergenerational community of Black environmentalists who recently held a teach out here in our borough to discuss how calling the Bronx dirty is internalized environmental racism. Here to discuss more is Jaylin Ward of Generation Green. Jaylin, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. It's an honor.
Honor having you as well. Can you tell us more about Generation Green and your mission?
Yeah, so Generation Green was started by a couple colleagues and I. We all go to Howard University, but we were invited to a Green New Deal conference like a while back, and we connected with other HBCU students who are interested in environmental justice. And we realized that we were all in these white spaces, but we had a very specific message about connecting climate issues to like our racial experience in this country because they're very much so related. So we started Generation Green to give a platform for young Black environmental leaders who want to make it clear that environmental racism is connected to climate change and that Black and Brown communities are being hit currently by climate change, and we're going to be on the front lines of this battle. So we're trying to make that message clear through media, teach outs, and anything that we can do to get that message out there.
Thank you for sharing that, Jaylin. And recently, Generation Green held a teach out defining what environmental racism looks like in the Bronx in particular, and what people should take into consideration when thinking, quote, the Bronx is dirty, right? Can you please tell us about this teach out and your recent educational post on your social media page surrounding this topic?
Yeah, so I grew up hearing like, oh, the Bronx is mad dirty, like just all the time. I'm like, okay, you're not wrong, but there's a reason. There's a reason. I'm from Co-op City, and I was a Girl Scout, and I was just always doing environmental things like planting trees and cleaning up after Hurricane Sandy. So I've always done environmental things in Black spaces, but I never considered what the environment meant. And your environment is your immediate surroundings. So if the Bronx is dirty, that's an environmental justice issue that we need to confront, and we need to confront why. So I did some archival research, and I found out that this is a issue that has been persistent in this area since like the 1800s, and then exacerbated in the 1930s when they decided to do redlining to divide white communities from Black and Brown communities, and then by the 1970s, where we have the issue of burning down buildings for insurance money, we have fire departments pulling out of the Bronx, we have trash collection companies pulling out of the Bronx, we have all of our health and quality of life resources pulling out of the area. And that's how we end up with this catastrophe of particulate matter exacerbating asthma. We have the construction of highways. We have, backed up trash collection. So that's how we end up with all of these environmental issues that impact our health, So the post on Instagram was just to plant the seed and get the conversation started and connect people to the history.
And it did, and it came at a timely moment where, we're facing COVID-19 and health injustices in our borough. And it's not a coincidence that the rates of COVID-19 are so high here. It has to do with environmental injustice. It has to do with environmental racism. So thank you for sharing that post. It was really, a conversation starter for people in our borough for sure. Jaylin, can you share what made you personally decide that you wanted to get into this environmental work, and also share the impact of the work of Black environmentalists?
Yeah, so before college, like I just thought the environment was like national parks and grass and birds and, things like that. And as a Girl Scout, they really enforce getting into nature. But I realized that your environment is your immediate surroundings, and that is the truth. So if your environment doesn't have grass and birds and trees, you're pretty much breathing in smog because you don't have a cyclical nature that is, extracting a lot of the pollutants and exchanging with nature, So that's what we need to have, a symbiotic environment. But if you don't have that, that's your environment. So realizing that made me feel responsible, because I can't see a problem and just be like, oh, damn, that's sad. So that really inspired me. So transitioning my work as a Girl Scout and into something more adult-like was why I got involved with Generation Green. I also work with this program called Soul Track, which is a collective of environmentalists started by, his name is Tyree. He was one of the first Black people to almost summit to this mountain in Alaska. What is it called? It's at Alaska's National Park, but it's the highest mountain in North America. So he decided to share his joy for environmentalism with a lot of Black people in DC. So I got on board with that, and I also garden in DC to provide food for queer, trans, Black, and Indigenous people, and just students facing food insecurity. And all those things are little parts of our environment. We need to interact with it, we need to benefit from it, and we need to make a sustainable plan to continue this relationship. So that's how I got into it, just feeling responsible.
I love it. Holding space for the community and, welcoming people into these discussions. Like you said at the beginning, it's mostly, discussions happening in white spaces, but we need to open them up for our Black and Brown community as well. Since all of these injustices. Jaylin, I also wanted to ask you to please tell us about your podcast, Black and Breathless, and how you link environmental issues to the pandemic and other racial justice inequalities in communities of color through this podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast, Black and Breathless, it kind of plays off of the idea that, when he said, I can't breathe, like that was a big issue. It wasn't only because he's being suffocated, it's because like also your environment, he had asthma, like that was an underlying condition as well. So, and to be in New York City where those rates are higher, it's an environmental justice issue as well. So that was a wake up moment for many of my friends and I, and we realized that, this is like police brutality and other systems of white supremacy are very much so connected to our environmental experience. So we decided, like, since we noticed that in conversation, we're like, yo, we should have a podcast. And that's kind of how it started. So we just tried to implement every facet of life, from spirituality to climate change, and just loop that in back into the message. And it's not about creating a space at the table with white people. It's kind of creating our own space to talk about the issues that matter to us and reconciling with that, a very safe space to just express the things you've gone through environmentally, and just reconciling with that, healing through that. And that's what your environment should do. So that's what we talk about. It's about everything. We talk about why California is burning, and then we loop it back around to E5 or somehow. It just, it's a conversation.
Where can people check it out, the podcast?
Yes, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, probably a couple other streaming services, but those are the top three. I like to listen to podcasts on Spotify. I think it's an immersing experience. But yeah, we're on all three of those.
Agreed. And folks, if you missed the name, it's Black and Breathless on Spotify and all the streaming platforms that Jaylin just noted. What do you believe that environmental justice would look and feel like in our communities, and how can we get there?
That's a very good question. And I think I started answering that with feeling responsible and thinking about what can I do first? How can I use my skills to accomplish this goal? So if you're great at cooking, then you should be like, how can I make my culinary arts more sustainable? How can I feed people? How can I use that to respond to my environment? So it's not about getting up and protesting and doing rallies on climate change. It's a lot more than that for Black and Brown communities. It has a lot to do with poverty. It has a lot to do with education. So you just consider first, how can I use my skills to accomplish a morsel of this goal and share that experience with people? So it's about the personal accountability, and then opening up to your family and friends and their friends, and just building community on those things. Like I say, everyone has a role. We can't all be marching and protesting on climate change. Everybody has work, everybody has school. So it's important that we connect our skills to a very tangible goal.
Yeah, beautiful advice. Thank you.
You're
Stay
welcome.
connected with Generation Green and listen to the Black and Breathless podcast. You already gave us that info earlier, but just staying
Yes.
connected with y'all online. How can people?
Yes. So you can connect with us on Instagram. We are very responsive. We see y'all comments. We see everything. Our Instagram is at generation_green. And we have Twitter. We don't really use it, but connect with us on Instagram and hear us on the sound waves with our Black and Breathless podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud.
Thank you, Jaylin, for joining us today and for sharing more about Generation Green.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Sonyi.
Thank you. Folks, again, you can follow Generation Green on social media at generation_green on Instagram for updates, educational postings, and more. You can also visit their website, gen-green.org. That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning into BXRX. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and your family safety and wellness now and always.